All right. So, okay. So again, for those of you who just joined us, please mute your microphones on the left corner, bottom corner, so that we don't get any background noise. Thank you so much. Okay. So we are. I'm hoping to talk for a while. So I would like to cover 27 slides. And of course, not all of them will be about Russia. Some of them will be about the exam and the paper question, etc. So Thomas, is that you? Could you turn the microphone off, please? Mute your microphone. Okay, I think he couldn't hear me. Okay, so your midterm grades have been released, as you, I'm sure, already noticed. Most of you also received your papers back, first paper. I think we only had 3 students. So please email my TA so that they can make an arrangement for you to pick up your papers, because you do need your first paper. I also posted some sample papers from the, of course, first paper question. Please go ahead and check those sample papers out, because we identify them as some of the best papers. I was also glad to hear that the average grade for the exam, second exam, was much higher. It was 76 as opposed to 72 in the first exam. And the average for the solo and the collaborative, I mean, especially the solo part was much higher. I'm also holding online office hours today due to elections, because I know many of you will be still voting, and I also know some of you are volunteering. So this is not something we will do each time, but for today, I decided this is the best way to go. We might hold some office hours, online office hours in the future, if this really works for all of us. Okay, so let me start with the second paper question, because according to the syllabus, again, today you are getting the second paper question. I have already posted the question. In fact, we have 2 questions, because I wanted to give you an option. The first option is to revise your first paper. The reason why we do this is, over years, I noticed that students get our feedback. However, we see the same mistakes repeated over and over again. For instance, after 3 years, when you start taking my upper division classes, or even next year, I see very similar problems being repeated. So I thought about this, and I decided perhaps the reason, because we are giving you feedback, you are taking the paper back home, and probably either don't even read the feedback, or read it but do not really pay much attention to it when you write your next paper. So I decided to come up with this new assignment that requires students to incorporate the feedback that they receive on the first draft before they write the second paper or the final draft. So this is where this assignment is coming from. I also collected data to see how students really incorporate, and I also asked them to write half a page evaluation of their experience, and publish this. And it turned out to be, this article turned out to be one of the most popular articles published on this topic, because this is about critical thinking. Okay, so the first option is, again, to take your paper, read it really carefully, read the feedback really carefully, revise it, and in the meantime, incorporate 6 outside sources. So we are trying to complicate the paper at this point. The initial paper was an analytical paper. Now we are incorporating additional sources to make it much more complicated and nuanced. So I identified some outside sources myself. So please check that out. Again, check them out if they are posted in Canvas. So I require you to choose 4 outside sources out of my sources. You can choose all 6 sources from the sources that I identified. I identified 10 of them. Or you have the option of choosing 4 from my list, from your own. Could you turn off your please, everybody, please turn off your or mute your microphone so that I don't hear any. Thank you. Okay. So again, you are required to use 6 outside sources. I identified 10 of them. So you can choose 4 from my list, and then 2, you can just choose anything you want from LexisNexis database. So I recommend you read all the 10 sources that I identified, because I really want you to read as much as possible. Okay, so you are still going to write a 5-page paper. What this means is you need to incorporate the feedback and also add 6 additional sources. Then you are going to end up with, if you simply add them, you know, to your previous paper, you are going to end up with like 7-page paper. That's not what we want. So the idea is to really revise your paper so that it is still 5 pages. And this is intentional, because writing a longer paper doesn't mean a better paper. Okay, so I want you to really think about what you have written and tighten it really well and make a really concise argument. So, and then you are supposed to attach your first paper to the second paper and write this postscript. This is part of, if you remember, this is part of critical thinking. So if a student is conscientious about the process of learning, they learn much better. That's the idea. So I want you, on a separate paper, I want you to include a paragraph that explains how you improved your paper, what changes you have made, and also what you learned during this process. And then cite your sources and turn your paper on time, which is November 29 in class. So this is the first option. The second option, if you don't want to work on the first paper, which I strongly recommend, because again, there is a logic behind this assignment and it really works well. But for some reason, if you don't want to do it, I didn't want to penalize my students and force them to work on the same topic. So you have a second option. The second option is a completely different topic. And second option, you know, question is the following. So you are expected to write a 5-page paper again in discussing how the socialist regimes and the aftermath in the Soviet Union and China have differed from each other. So specifically, I want you to compare this Chinese socialism with the Soviet socialism and identify different ways in which, you know, they really pursue their socialist interpretation. Again, the paper will be only 5 pages long, but you need to rely on chapter 7 and 8 for the analytical part. But I also identified outside sources. The rule is the same. Use 6 outside sources. You can choose 4 of them from my list, and 2 you can identify them on your own. Or if you want, you can choose all 6, sources from my list. It's up to you. those outside sources that you find yourself, please include them to your paper. Okay, so do you have any questions so far? Brooke, can you hear me? Could you please mute your microphone? Brooke? Thank you. All right. So if you have any questions from the paper question, please jump in and ask your question now.
Yes, I have a question about the second option. So, we're writing basically a compare and contrast sort of paper?
Right. It's a compare and contrast, but specifically I want you to identify 3 or 5 points differences to discuss. So 3 minimum.
All right.
Okay, is that clear?
Yes, thank you.
Thanks. Any other questions? All right, then we can move on. Okay, after the exam, I'm going to start our last topic, which is the socialist system. So you can see on this slide, the socialist countries in history have been identified in red. So, the dark red area shows the ones that started, with this experience pretty early, starting from the 1920s and 30s. And then bright red shows the regions that started this experience in the 1940s and 50s, and then the orange part shows much later socialist experiences. So just to remember what we have been doing so far is we are asking 3 major broad questions in this class. So the first question we already asked that one. The first one was why some countries are democratic and others not. So we also asked the second question, why some countries are more developed than others. So at the end of each question, we had an example. Right? So in this class, there is only one question remaining. That is the third one, which is why some countries chose a socialist path, and what explains the differences among these experiences. And we have 2 case studies again, Russia and China. Okay, so the first case study is Russia, and here is the map. Here's a closer map showing all its neighbors. Reason why I chose Russia is because this is the first experience. This is the first country to experience a socialist system over previous system, pre-capitalist system, and began this journey, and really has influenced significant number of countries, socialist countries in the world. Plus, it's a very, very large country. So apart from the fact that it was the first country, the Soviet. Yusuf, could you please mute your microphone? Thank you. So apart from the fact that it was the first, experience, this is a quite large country with a lot of, former states. And the reason, we will talk about the reasons, but once it began to decline and then collapse at the end of the 1980s, the impact, the repercussions of all these experiences were great in the world. And after that, the question became, how are we going to reconstruct this new country, and how are we going to help Russia to experience this smooth transition from a socialist system to a capitalist system, and it hasn't been a smooth journey at all. So I would like to ask the question, which is, why did this first socialist revolution take place in Russia? That's a very interesting question, because nobody expected this experience from Russia. On the contrary, you know, the prediction by Marx and other Marxists were that revolution was going to take place in the most advanced capitalist countries, not in a pre-capitalist society like Russia. Okay, what is the disclaimer? Well, the disclaimer is that when I lecture about, you know, in the past, when I lectured about Marxism, one misunderstanding that some students had was that they thought I was advocating. Well, it's a disclaimer to you know, clarify that we went over so many, you know, ideologies. This is part of the course material. So I really would like you to learn about ideologies, because these are all relevant. We went over so many different ideologies, and socialism and communism are one of some of those ideologies. So explaining a political system, why it happened and how it happened, really doesn't mean advocacy at all. I mean, it's just the reason, you know, we talked about, for instance, the Nigerian system or the economic system in Mexico, etc. Just doesn't mean that we are advocating. We are simply describing our role as a scientist. You know, it's like we are in a lab and describing the, you know, experiments to our readers. So keep that in mind, that this is not an advocacy. Okay. All right. So in order to answer the question why the socialist revolution took place in Russia, we need to talk about two major factors: structural factors and the role of the agency. The first, you know, group of factors, the structural ones, are the ones that are beyond the human control. So let's talk about them. We are basically talking about history, you know, the institutions. So in this particular case, we are talking about an empire, a very old and strong empire, but having difficult time because of the new developments, kind of fell behind. New developments came from Europe, so particularly the industrialization and nationalism, you know, trends that took place in capitalism. So at the beginning of the 20th century, Russia remained mostly agrarian. So this was not a capitalist society at all. It began experiencing some industrialization, but it was still in early stages of industrialization. This was not an industrialized country at all. So very similar to other empires, this empire was also highly autonomous. What we mean by that is, if you remember, autonomy referred to the state's ability to take actions without the influence of its population, domestic or, you know, outside influence. So, you know, empires were typically that way, and Russian Empire was one of them. So, you know, there was really no system in which the empire, you know, was able to incorporate the feedback from its population. Rather, it had its own autonomy, it had its own separate interest, and was really used to acting that way. So at the beginning of the 20th century, similar to other empires, the Russian Empire began experiencing a lot of problems, you know, economic difficulties, you know, difficulties with secessionist movements, those, you know, small ethnic groups trying to be independent and, fighting wars against the empire, etc. So all of this created political unrest inside the country. So in response to these unrest, the Russian Empire initiated a reform process. In Russia, so Yusuf, could you please turn off your microphone? And all of you, please. Thank you. I don't know who else. Let me try to see. Thank you. Okay. So, when we look at the empires at the beginning of the 20th century, we see a very similar, trend there. So in the Ottoman Empire, for instance, there were 1908 reforms. In the Iranian Empire, there were 1911. And then Russia had those reforms in 1905, and very similarly, the Chinese reforms also took place at the beginning of the century. So you can see that these empires were really struggling to keep up with all these developments. But what happened was that in response to these reforms, the political unrest did not calm down. On the contrary, the unrest really, continued and gained more momentum. And when the First World War started in 1914, this was really a final straw to the empire, because it made the empire much weaker and really vulnerable to these political unrest. So this was such a small window of opportunity for the communists to take advantage. These were structural factors, but they were able to take advantage of this through Lenin and Leninist organization. So Lenin believed that this is very interesting. We still have Leninist organizational, structure, and Lenin believed that masses that Marx was talking about would never rise up on their own and launch a revolution, because Lenin thought, unlike Marx, masses are just not conscious. They don't have their class consciousness. They are perhaps lazy and somewhat too busy with their own lives, so they don't have time to organize and launch a revolution. And as a result, Lenin said, if you just sit around and wait for a socialist revolution, and that's never going to happen. That's why Lenin believed that small vanguard party or professional or revolutionaries have to launch the revolution on behalf of the masses. So this is what we mean by Lenin's organization. Some Islamists also have adopted this particular organizational type. So accordingly, this organization doesn't try to recruit millions of people and try to turn this into a social movement. Rather, it's a very hierarchically organized, very small, organization that intends to lead the revolution, launch the revolution on behalf of the masses, and they hope that the masses would continue. So it is a top-down, revolutionary type. So Lenin and Bolsheviks got organized and used this small window of opportunity to launch their socialist revolution. Again, this was quite different from the Marxist, Marx's original ideas, because Marx really thought the revolution would take place in the UK, the most advanced capitalist society. But Lenin said, well, we really have to wait that long, because Russia is not even capitalist. So we have to wait for Russia to be capitalist first, and then, be very advanced capitalist country, and then, we can launch the revolution. Wow, this is going to take for 200 years. How about we have a shortcut? So as a pre-capitalist society, you might just, thanks to the Leninist organizations and Bolsheviks, we might just in a shortcut and pass through, capitalism, bypass capitalism and reach socialism. This was the idea behind it. But what is socialism? So socialism, as you will already remember, is quite different from a social democratic system. Socialism is a system in which classes do not exist and there is no capitalist class, there is no capitalist economic system. Wealth and property are shared by everybody, and the bourgeoisie class that is considered as exploitative and oppressive is eliminated. So these are the changes that take place at the economic level, but there are also changes that take place at the political level, because according to Marx's original ideas, political systems do exist in order to support the interests of the bourgeoisie, which is the capitalist class. So once the bourgeoisie class is eliminated, then all those political institutions that are there to support the bourgeoisie are not going to be there as well, because we are not going to need them anymore. So political implications will be there as well. So political institutions that support the capitalist system also are eliminated. So here I need to talk about a very difficult concept, which is surplus value. The concept of surplus value, because that's one of the contributions of Marx to the socialist theory. But in order to talk about surplus value, I need to talk about the exchange value first. Exchange value, according to the classicals, and classicals are identified as Ricardo, Smith, and Marx. So exchange value is the value of a product that's determined by the labor time embodied in that commodity. So let's say there's this glass, right? It's paper glass. So there is this, of course, there's some labor that's embodied in this glass. Somebody made the lid. You might say, well, it just probably came out of a factory, but somebody made that factory. So there's always some labor in everything that we use. I mean, there's this mouse or the paper. So exchange value is determined by how much labor goes into it. So if something really is laborious, it means that the exchange value of that product is going to be much higher. So according to these classicals, the components of a commodity is the labor value of its parts. So there's this sleeves, and then the glass itself, and then the lid, and all the material that really went into it, plus the labor. These are the exchange values, right? So what kind of material? Well, the raw material, I'm sure there's some trees, that went into this, some plastic, again, more trees and some ink, etc. So there's this raw material, and then somebody put them together, or if it came out of the factory, somebody put the factory together. So the components of commodity is the raw material plus number of hours that the worker spends to make the commodity. So the first one is called the dead labor. In fact, it was Ricardo who called that a dead labor, because, the material that went into it, it is no longer live, it is dead, like the trees. The second one, which is the labors that the workers spend to put this together, is called present labor. So that's a concept that Smith came up with. And Marx agreed with both of them, so the dead labor and the present. But Marx went one step ahead, and he came up with this concept called surplus value. Because Marx said, well, there is this dead labor and this, and then the present labor. But when the worker came up with this product, let's say this can be produced for like 1 cent, the value, that went into it. But the capitalist who owned the factory sells this for 5 cents actually, right? So he said the difference is those 4 cents, and that goes to the capitalist as the profit, but it should actually go to the worker, because it is, he's or she's the one who, made this product that is worth 5 cents rather than 1 cent, right? But in a capitalist system, that is the profit, and that's what the capitalists, take away. So he called that the surplus value. So, you can see it, on the slide as well. There's the raw material, and then the production made by the labor, and then we come up with the commodity, and the commodity is always sold, at a higher price than the sum of the production and the raw material. And that's where, the profits coming from. And that's why, according to Marx, the capitalist system is exploitative, because, that profit should go to the worker rather than the capitalist. So as a result, the capitalist system is exploiting the worker. So I hope it's clear. If it is not, please, unmute your microphone and let me know. I'm waiting. So I suppose this is clear. Okay, there's another picture that, again, tries to explain the same concept, the surplus value. So you can see that, there's this necessary labor time to produce any commodity, let's say 5 hours, right? But it is the products are always sold for more than 5 hours. Let's say they are sold like 15, the worth of 15 hours in a capitalist system, because the capitalists want to make profit, right? So that difference is called the surplus value, and that's where the exploitation lies, according to Marx. So this slide only explains what I just, said. So surplus value of labor is the most important conceptual contribution of Marx, because he agreed with Ricardo and Smith, but he did go one step further, and that's where the disagreement came from. And Marx also said that at the core of human relations, there is these economic relations. So, in other words, in order to understand the society, in order to compare societies, we need to understand the economic systems, because that's where the most important, relations lie. And he believes that the private property is exploitative, because, according to the surplus value, the extra profit that the capitalists get are turned into, of course, properties, right? So that's why the property is a problem. But we are not talking about here the ownership of a car or a house, the ownership of the factory. So the ownership of where the production takes place is the problem, rather than the ownership of, the private house. So according to another concept, So this was, so far I talked about the surplus value of labor. Another concept which is very important to understand Marxism is the relationship between base and structure. So according to Marx, all human relations come from this interaction, resulted from this interaction between the haves and have-nots. Okay, so those who own the means of the production and those who do not. What I mean by the means of production is factories, right? So according to Marx, the relationship between base and structure it really is enough to understand the society. In other words, when we understand the base or how the production takes place and the classes, which is the relations of production, we can understand the political system in that society because base determines the superstructure. So base includes all the means of production and the relations of production. So all the economic relations, who owns the factories, what kind of classes we have, those are the bases. And the base determines the superstructure. But what is a superstructure? Everything that doesn't belong to the base belongs to the superstructure. So here we're talking about the political institutions, political structure, culture, religion. I mean, everything you can imagine goes into the superstructure. In other words, Marx is saying that economic relations determine everything else. So if a system is socialist, we can actually expect to see certain culture because socialism brings certain culture. But if the system is capitalist, then we can expect to see a different culture because culture is determined by the base again. That's interesting, right? So, for instance, some examples: religion, or so media, curriculums, education system, ideologies such as nationalism. These are all part of the superstructure, according to Marx, and they are all determined by the economic system. So, in other words, the liberal assumptions, think about the liberalism, the assumptions by liberalism, which were like, people are autonomous, people are rational, they know what is best for them. According to Marx, it's not the case because people are simply the products of their society. So our consciousness, our ideologies, the things that we came up with, and we think we came up with them on our own independently, Marx thinks that they are just products of their environment. So these are very different ideologies, these are very different starting points, and they really go against each other, so liberalism and socialism. Okay, I have to stop here because there are some quicker questions, and I think I just went too fast because I was planning to talk about these issues, in about an hour. But let me turn to you and ask if you have questions. I'm sure you do, so go ahead, please. Come on. No questions?
I have a question.
Please.
So my question is, will you post the slides a little fast?
Uh-huh.
You will be posting these?
Am I going to post these slides?
Yeah.
Okay, this is what I'm going to post. After the meeting, I'm going to, because this is being recorded.
Okay, cool.
Right, so I'm going to record, post the recording so you can see the slides there.
That's even better then, thank you.
Mm-hmm. Any other questions? Okay, let's see how many, so I can stop sharing here. I'm just curious how many students I have 32. So is there any other question you have? Please go ahead and ask, because otherwise I'm going to, end the meeting here. But please keep in mind that I'm holding my office hours online again today. So if you have any questions about the paper or about anything else, please click on the link that I sent you today. Check your emails.
I have a question. Am I good? Okay. So my question was about, in the readings yesterday, it talked about how Russia historically is a country that favors equality over freedom, obviously, with the communist regime. And then you have like Putin, and he's, I think, putting in liberal policies. So I'm just really curious, in the case of modern Russia, like today, how they stand on that issue, like more social democratic or socialist, or more like liberal.
Economically speaking, they began implementing the liberal policies right after the collapse of the Soviet Union. In fact, we are going to learn about this more in detail, but they began implementing these policies, so fast, maybe even too fast. And this is often referred to as the shock therapy. So they, began implementing the capitalist policies overnight, basically. So economically speaking, Russia is a lot liberal than many, other developing countries. However, when it comes to equality, whether they favor liberalism is a different question, because as soon as they began implementing these liberal policies, the society has suffered a lot. I mean, the unemployment rates, of course, just skyrocketed. So many people became, homeless. So many people died as a result of, the stress that they experienced during this process. So today, they are much more careful. They are much more, much more inclined to have, more egalitarian economic systems than just pure liberalism. Yeah. Sure, please go ahead. I don't hear you. Is that Peter? Is that you?
Oh, okay, yeah. Sorry, my mic was muted. Yeah, I have a question about the paper. Like, so when is the due date for that?
29th, November 29th. So this is after the Thanksgiving break.
All right.
Yeah, you can turn in your papers before if you want to, because I know, some students don't want to worry about it during the break. That's totally understandable. So you can definitely turn your paper in if you want to, early.
Okay, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
And when I got it, I
Other questions? Okay, if not, then I'm ending the meeting. Well, thank you so much for joining us today. I hope you have a wonderful day. Bye. Bye.